Well, joining us tonight to take all of this up and a great deal more is the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. He joins us tonight from New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. Mr. Vice President, it is great to see you, and it is particularly great to see you with all the enthusiasm behind you. Welcome to the broadcast, and let's start with a comparison, if I may. A former Vice President doesn't seem to be approaching your work level. You are, I have to believe, among vice presidents, you have to be at the very top for miles covered in the first 4 years of the presidency. Joe Biden is once again in retreat for 3 days from public view and certainly avoiding questions. Your reaction to the standard he's setting on the campaign trail?
Well, Lou, it's great to be with you from Pennsylvania, and I can tell you I'm the second hardest working person on the Trump-Pence team. President Trump and I are traveling all over this country. And I promise you, we're gonna do just what we did in 2016. We're gonna go out and tell the story of the vision, the leadership of this president, all that we've done for the people of Pennsylvania and the people of America, and we're gonna earn 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House.
Mr. Vice President, I think those people behind you are corroborating your view that you've earned it. Let's turn to, if we may, the latest in the reporting on the Biden scandal by the New York Post, and I want to talk about that first and foremost before we move to the response of the national left-wing media, which has been to suppress the story by Twitter, Facebook, to also suppress it, but in fact absolutely obliterate First Amendment rights of all Americans, because they would not permit that to be transmitted across their platforms. First, your reaction to the reporting of the New York Post revealing all sorts of deals, and I would say backroom deals, but it may be darker and more sinister even than that.
Well, we just stand for the principle the American people have a right to know what's going on here. The Director of National Intelligence today, I know, made it clear that there is no evidence to suggest that the information on that computer reported in the New York Post is a result of any disinformation campaign. And the American people have a right to know about the business dealings of the Biden family. I mean, Lou, we just spent the last 3.5 years where the Democrat nominee in 2016 had worked with a foreign entity to try and dig up dirt on President Trump. And I don't remember the media shutting off access to that information. The American people looked at it. We went through the ordeal of 2.5 years of investigations until we found there was no obstruction, no collusion. Case closed. But now it just seems like all the pundits, present company accepted, and a few others on the Fox networks, notwithstanding, they're all looking the other way. And I just don't get it, Lou. The stakes in this election couldn't be higher. The choice couldn't be clearer. The American people have every right to know about Joe Biden and his family, and to get answers. And it's time for Joe Biden to step up and start answering questions of the American people about what was going on before, during, and after his service as vice president.
The former vice president is not keen on answering questions. He doesn't put himself in a position where he must, or makes it clear he doesn't want to descend to the level of a public official who has to answer questions in a democracy. I want to just, for our audience, show some of the examples of the former vice president's positions on fracking, and President Trump taking him to task for this in the most recent so-called town hall. Biden, Harris have been denying that was their position over the last several days. Your reaction?
Right. Well, look, let's be real clear. I mean, President Donald Trump has led an American energy renaissance. We are now a net exporter of energy for the first time in 70 years. And fracking, so important here in the great state of Pennsylvania, has been a key part of that. And for the last year, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, as you just saw again, repeatedly said they were going to abolish fossil fuels, they were going to ban fracking. But then Joe Biden comes to Pittsburgh a few weeks ago and says that President Trump is lying about his record. And, you know, I said here in Pennsylvania today, it reminds me of what Groucho Marx said, Lou. He said, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? I mean, the American people know that we ought to have the ability in this country to develop all the resources of our country. President Donald Trump has done that, and we're going to continue to drive a boundless American future built on American energy independence for many years to come.
Well, the people in Pennsylvania are going to have to they're going to have to assess what their lying eyes have told them and their ears hear, because the record on the part of Harris and Biden is clear. They said they were opposed to fracking. So to me, it's just unimaginable that they could think they could deny what is already on video.
And Lou, it's so important that people understand. I mean, look, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party have been overtaken by the radical left. And so, frankly, whatever Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are saying today, the reality is that when you look at the $2 trillion Green New Deal, when you look at the radical environmental agenda that is driving this Democratic Party, you know that those promises to ban fossil fuels, they're going to keep those promises, particularly if they hold the House of Representatives and find a way to win the United States Senate. But right now we got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that are dodging questions and bobbing and weaving, and frankly, the same thing's going on the issue of packing the court. I mean, it's incredible. Joe Biden last week during that town hall meeting said he's open to considering it. When she was a candidate for president, Kamala Harris said she was absolutely open to packing the court. That'd be the biggest power grab in American history. I mean, and yet now he's telling us he's not going to answer the question until after Judge Barrett is confirmed. Well, Joe, you know, as I said today in Pennsylvania, come on, Joe. 27 million people have already voted. You're going to wait another week and a half before you tell the American people what you're going to do. We know what's going on here. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party, and the radical left that's driving them today, if they win this election, if they win the Senate and the House, they're going to add seats to the Supreme Court. They're going to pack it with liberal activist judges that'll drive their liberal agenda. So whether it's on American energy or whether it's on the rule of law and upholding our Constitution and all the God-given liberties enshrined there, the choice is clear. We need 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House.
And it's startling to hear you talk about the number of Americans who've already voted. Those Americans who've already voted didn't know about the Biden scandal, don't know the evidence behind that scandal. That is, as you say, I mean, it's every American's right to know, but every American has a responsibility to know these things. And they also have voted without seeing the final debate in this presidential campaign. It's truly outrageous, and particularly given that big tech, social media, and the national corporate-owned left-wing media, Comcast, NBC, AT&T, CNN, Walt Disney Companies, ABC News, these entities, organizations have combined to attack the Trump administration, trying in league with the deep state, the radical Dems, and broadly the national left-wing media and academia to destroy this president's agenda, and to overthrow this president. What are you going to do about what Twitter and Facebook? What is your government going to do here?
Well, your point is so well taken. Look, the American people have a right to know what the truth is behind the allegations about Joe Biden and his family and foreign dealings. But I have to tell you, of equal importance is not only the silence by much of the mainstream media, the lack of interest in this story at all, but the fact that you have major social media companies that have literally been blocking access to the New York Post story. I mean, that's an outrage. The American people believe in the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and the freedom of the press. And President Trump and I are not going to allow big tech to block the truth. I promise you, with 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House, we're going to take strong action to ensure the free flow of information, not only across the airways of this country, but across the internet in this country. It should be an outrage to any American, left, right, or center, that you have Facebook and Twitter in recent days that have literally blocked access to the American people to read a story, to evaluate it for themselves. And I promise you, in the days ahead, we're going to ensure the American people's freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and a free and independent press is preserved in this nation for generations to come.
Mr. Vice President, that is a message that all Americans need to hear and take with them into the polling booths all across the country, because it's critically important. That denied, this republic falls, and that's where we are right now. That threat is very real and a clear and present danger, as we all know. As we're watching President Trump and Vice President Pence right now in these final 2 weeks, you guys are putting on quite a show. I mean, I can't even count. You're a different place every day, and sometimes two or three places every day, as is the president. He's been in seven states in a week, and 2 weeks ago he was just getting out of the hospital. And Biden is back home in his basement, and Harris is in hiding. I don't know where she is or what she's doing. And the American people don't. I've never seen a campaign like this. I like your momentum. I'm just amazed that the Democrats think that they have this thing so locked up they can afford to behave in this way, as if it's a one-party system.
Well, Lou, I don't know what they're thinking on their side, but I got to tell you, the enthusiasm I saw in Maine this morning, the enthusiasm that I saw here in Pennsylvania, the tens of thousands of people that are coming out on very short notice every time President Donald Trump comes to town tells me all that I need to know. Is it just like 2016 when all the pundits and almost all the polls were saying otherwise? We won 4 years for President Donald Trump, and I truly do believe, because of all this president has done, where we rebuilt our military, we revived our economy by cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, fighting for free and fair trade, standing by and unleashing American energy, developing our fossil fuels, developing fracking in this country, appointing conservatives to our courts at every level, standing with law and order. That record has created enthusiasm in this movement like I've never seen before. And I believe that enthusiasm over the next 15 days is going to win us 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House.
And, Mr. Vice President, we're going to close with this news that broke today that the U.S. military will have a distribution system in place no later than the end of next month, so that when the vaccine is ready, it will be distributed almost immediately. A concluding word on that, if you would.
It's just incredible. I mean, from the very early days of this coronavirus pandemic, President Trump put the health of America first. He suspended all travel from China, what no American president had ever done. Joe Biden called that xenophobic and hysterical, said it would make things worse. But it allowed us to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. We not only reinvented testing, saw to the distribution of billions of medical supplies to our doctors and nurses, but before the month of February was out, Lou, we already began work on a coronavirus vaccine. And here we are just 8 months later. And we literally believe that before the end of this year, we will have the first safe and effective coronavirus vaccine. And under Operation Warp Speed, the American people deserve to know that we're going to have tens of millions of doses and a plan that you just referred to distribute those first and foremost to the most vulnerable among us, likely seniors, particularly those with serious underlying conditions, anyone with an immunodeficiency. Right. But Lou, I think all of us have learned a lot this year about vaccines and medicines. It usually takes years to develop a vaccine, but because of President Trump's leadership, because of him driving our research companies to move in record speed, clearing red tape out of the way, we're going to have the first safe and effective coronavirus vaccine. and distribute that vaccine to tens of millions of Americans before the year is out. That's leadership, Lou, and that's the leadership of President Donald Trump.
And he had a pretty good choice to lead the coronavirus task force, too, didn't he? Vice President Mike Pence, congratulations. Thanks so much. Good to see you.